inaugurated in August. Notably, and for those of us of a certain generation, I think it's important to underline that he is the first president in the Dominican Republic to have been born after the end of the Trujillo dictatorship. In addition to his political career, he has held several leading positions in the private sector in the Dominican Republic. He is a graduate of the Instituto Tecnológico de Santo Domingo and has studied in the United States, including at Harvard and Dartmouth colleges. President Abinader, welcome and thank you for joining us. The first question obviously has to do with COVID-19. You yourself had COVID during the campaign, obviously have recovered. The cases of COVID in the Dominican Republic have peaked in July and August and now have started to decline, but the US State Department still has a travel advisory telling US citizens not to go to the Dominican Republic. Tourism, as we know, is an enormous percentage of Dominican GDP, anywhere from 9 to 17%, depending on whose figures one consults. And in fact, the Dominican Republic is more dependent on tourism than any other country in Latin America. So for opening question is what kinds of efforts has the government made to control the pandemic and to help protect those whose jobs in the tourism sector, in other areas in the informal sector, who have been impacted by the pandemic? How do you see the future recovery of your country?
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you, the Woodrow Wilson Center and the American Chamber of Commerce for giving me this opportunity to communicate and to inform about all the projects and development of our government. I can tell you right now, today, that COVID is under control in the Dominican Republic. I have to say that we have half the lethality rate that United States has. We also have, at this moment, the less percentage of contagious, depending on the number of tests that we are doing. Even we have doubled the amount of tests, of possibility of doing tests, and people are no longer going because at this moment, as I said, COVID is under control in the country, and in much better circumstances than most of the countries of the region. We have 80% of the COVID beds free. We have 70% of the UCI beds free. We have 65% of the ventilators in the country, just for COVID, free. COVID is almost non-existent in the tourist areas. We have advised and speak with the State Department as well as the American Embassy in Santo Domingo, and they are evaluating the case because other countries has been going from 4 to 3 on the advisory to travel that are in worse circumstances than the Dominican Republic. And also as a package that we have done to relaunch the tourism sector, because as you said, it's very important for the Dominican economy, and it's the only part of the Dominican economy that has not recovered. We have recovered on the industrial side, on the free zones, on the agricultural sector, but we still have started to recover on the tourism sector. We on that package that we did to relaunch tourism, we are the only country in the world that is giving free a medical insurance to all tourists that comes to the Dominican Republic. Medical insurance to be treated in the best of the hospital that we have on the tourist regions, and as well if things or any patient complicate, then we have an ambulance that will return to his country of origin. And it has been working very well for tourists that are starting to come, especially to Punta Cana, to the Punta Cana region. So I can tell you at this moment, we were even selected one of the best countries to manage the COVID-19 by the OMS, and we are continue to do that. As I said, our lethality rate is one of the lowest in the world at 1.8. And we are continuing to do a very strict protocol in every public and private hospital in the country. There is not one region of the country that doesn't have nearby a COVID center at this moment. And as I said, and also nearby a UCA that depends on that COVID center in case that the patients get complicated. In terms of the economic part and the crisis that you mentioned generated by the pandemic, as I said, our industry is now practically on a normal status, except for the part that supplies to the tourism sector. But even on the non-tourism sector, it has increased comparing and with the last year. The agricultural sector is doing very well as the free zones that we are even exporting on free zones on the month of September more than we exported on 2019. We have given also, the government has given a special monetary incentive for companies to maintain employees during the COVID crisis, and that's we have helped. It has helped that the poverty has not increased as even multilateral organizations were predicted to do. So we are working also on the economic side to try to see if in the second quarter of next year we can get back to a normal situation after COVID. And I can tell you that the Dominican Republic, with all the economic measures and projects that we are doing, will come out stronger. Our government, which is a pro-jobs, pro-business, pro-transparency, we are doing a lot of policies to have a more transparent and fighting corruption in the Dominican Republic. We, in this administration also, we have established what has been what the civil society wants for several years, an attorney general politically independent that has been sworn, and it has no dependence on the president or any other political voice. So we have advanced a lot in terms of the security of the legal security, and we are continuing to do so to strengthen our legal security, and also our crime has been going down a lot also. So we are in a very good situation and establishing a lot of good policies for our country.
Excellent. President Abinader, thank you so much for being part of this conversation and our crisis conversation series. It's an honor to have this discussion. I want to talk a bit more about the investment climate in the Dominican Republic beyond tourism, and to hear even more from you on the subject of transparency, good governance, and fighting corruption. As you know, COVID-19 has worsened corruption throughout Latin America, particularly in public procurement for emergency healthcare spending, but also there's an anticipation of even worse corruption as we see more economic stimulus spending on infrastructure, often without the involvement of legislatures throughout the region, but through executive orders. In your campaign, you focused a great deal on transparency and anti-corruption, and I want to hear more about the measures that you have in mind, including about the greater independence for the Attorney General, which you just referenced, but also how you plan to address previous corruption. I recall that in your inaugural address, you said, and I quote, there would be no impunity for past corruption. And the expectation was that you were addressing the alleged bribery involving Odebrecht and the construction of a power plant outside Santo Domingo, but of course, other alleged instances of corruption before your new administration. So if you could talk a bit more about the measures you plan to implement to address anti-corruption, but also how you will look at previous instances.
Yes. You know, the main decision to do that is if you have an independent attorney general, as I said. And what is happening is that all the corruption cases that has been detected in every area of the government has been given to the attorney general, and they are working on the case. You have to remember that I just have 2.5 months in government, so all this process, you know, you have to create cases in case that it has the merit for it. So they are working on all these cases of corruption, but not just on the past government. We are also looking to any person, any government official from my government. It knows that it has no impunity, that the rule of law is for everybody, starting for the president. So that has been very clear in our administration. And at the same time, just to inform you how we have been dealing with purchasing and contract. The director for purchasing and contract of the government was the former representative of Transparency International in our country from Participación Ciudadana. So Carlos Pimentel, which is a person that even work on the law of transparency and contracts and purchasing, is the person in charge of and regulating that in our government. That regulation, even on the construction side, the government could not respond as fast as I would like to do. But what I have been telling our officials on the construction side area, saying between transparency and acceleration of work, you have to decide on transparency. And we are working fast, and now all this contract has been going with the procedure that this has to come. It's just also that the officials and the minister, they have to get used to all this control that needs every government to do so. So we are monitoring every aspect on this side to not just see the corruption on the past government, as I said also in my inauguration, that I said there will not be impunity for the past corruption, but there will also not be impunity for the current corruption. We were the one, and starting for the president, who has to give the example of transparency and honesty as a public servant that we are.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let's talk for a moment about the relationship between the United States and the Dominican Republic. Of course, you know, throughout history, it's been a complicated relationship. Military interventions in the early 19th century and during the Cold War in 1965, going through the negotiation of the free trade agreement, CAFTA-DR. In the United States, of course, we're on the cusp of another presidential election, but regardless of who wins here in the United States, where would you like to see the relationship with the United States go during your presidency? What do you see as the issues of priority? And then also, do you see a role for the Dominican Republic in nearshoring, this idea that companies that had been invested in China would come closer to the United States, not only within the United States, but to countries geographically close to the US?
Yes, I have said, and I repeat today, that we need to have an special relation of the United States. Starting that we have more than 2 million Dominicans, especially in the northeast of the United States, in the all east, from Florida to Massachusetts. We have, and all over the United States, we have more than 2 million Dominicans. The United States is our main commercial partner in terms of imports and also of exports. We have and need to have an strategic alliance with the United States to fight corruption, to fight international crime, and to fight especially narcotics. I have to say that, and I informed last week, that in 2 months of our government, we have our Marine has done more interception, double the interception that were done in the 8 months of the past government. So we are working very closely with the DEA. We are working very closely with all agencies that fight crime. And as I said, we need to prioritize the relation with the United States, and we need a special relation with the United States. The relation that also have to be of respect, and with our government. They know that we share the same values of democracy, the same value of working for the transparency and fighting corruption. So this is not something that they have to work with me to try to establish in the Dominican Republic, because I am the one that it is convinced that we have to fight for democracy in the region and also for good government on transparency and respecting the dignity and independence of its nation. Concerning nearshoring, I think the Dominican Republic is on the best of the conditions for the nearshoring. And we have a task force working in that objective, which is headed by the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and is working with some other businessmen, especially from the free zones. And I think the Dominican Republic will be the country will be receptive of thousands of jobs coming from the nearshoring and industries establishing in this country.
I want to talk more, Mr. President, about the relationship with the United States from a broader geostrategic framing. And you may guess what theme I'm hinting at. You know, in trying to establish this strategic relationship, you've spoken about shared values, including democracy. But an issue that has complicated those relations under the previous government has to do with China. In 2018, the Dominican Republic broke ties with its longtime partner, Taiwan, and established full diplomatic relations with Beijing. And at the time, China promised a $3 billion economic package, including substantial investments in infrastructure throughout the Dominican Republic. That was 2 years ago. And so my 2 questions are, number one, in your estimation, has China lived up to the promises that it made in persuading the Dominican Republic to break ties with Taiwan? But also whether you see the new relationship with China as a potential obstacle to the close ties that you seek with the United States. And everyone will recall that in protest of that decision, the US State Department had pulled its most senior diplomat from the Dominican Republic.
I repeat, there has been, and I have been very clear, my position here has to be with we need to be on the side of an strategic alliance with the United States. For all the reasons that I already said, we need to have that strategic alliance with the United States. That doesn't also mean that we cannot have a commercial relation with China that we even had before opening formal relations with them. And if they want to have investment in non-strategic areas of the country, they could have investment in non-strategic areas of the government. And I have been very clear that, I have been said that very clear to the ambassador of China. I have said that also very clear in the Dominican Republic. We can have good relations with China if they want to invest in areas that are non-strategic for our country. They are welcome, and they can do it. But the decision of this government and what is on the best interest of the Dominican Republic is to have a strategic alliance on the side of the United States.
Can I just ask you to quickly specify what you mean by the strategic sectors of the economy? This is an issue, of course, that even the US grapples with a very complex process of reviewing in foreign investment in areas that are considered strategic. In your mind, are you talking about telecommunications, the 5G technology? What are the areas that you consider off limits for potential Chinese investment?
No, on the non-strategic, I mean, the strategic areas are very clear on that you can say, for example, ports, airports, telecommunications. These are part of areas that has to relate to the security of our country. That I mean for strategic and areas.
Thank you.
Thank you. Boy, this mute and unmute button takes a little bit of time. As an island nation, the Dominican Republic is clearly vulnerable to a changing climate on our planet. More frequent and more violent hurricanes, questions of sea level rise. How is the Dominican Republic adapting or looking towards the future to adapt to these more difficult and harsher realities?
For the first time, after it was created 7 years ago, we had this week, we had the first meeting of the
businessman, a politician, the leader of the modern Revolutionary Party, the PRM. He was elected president this past July and was inaugurated in August. Notably, and for those of us of a certain generation, I think it's important to underline that he is the first president in the Dominican Republic to have been born after the end of the Trujillo dictatorship. In addition to his political career, he has held several leading positions. Campaign obviously have recovered. The cases of COVID in the Dominican Republic have peaked in July and August and now have started to decline, but the US State Department still has a travel advisory telling US citizens not to go to the Dominican Republic. Tourism, as we know, is an enormous percentage of Dominican GDP, anywhere from 9 to 17%, depending on whose figures one consults. And in fact, the Dominican Republic is more dependent on tourism than any other country in Latin America. So